Hey there, Writer Rebels. It's the 1st of October, and you know what that means, the beginning of Preptober, the start of Nanowrimo season. Join me today while I talk about my plan and some great tips on how to rock your Preptober. Hey there, everyone. My name is Scarlett Kol, and welcome to my channel. If you've been here before, thank you so much for coming back, but if you're brand new, thank you so much for joining us. I usually release videos on Thursdays about writing and publishing, and today we are going to be talking about one of the biggest writing events of the season, and that's going to be Nanowrimo, and starting in October, Preptober, which is the month before Nanowrimo, or National Novel Writing Month, if you've never heard of it before. And this is where we start getting all of our exciting projects ready to go, and so we're ready to start right on November 1st and get those 50,000 words in for the entire month. If you've never heard of National Novel Writing Month, that is the goal, 50,000 words in a month, or 1,667 words per day. All right, so there's two things I want to talk about for my Preptober. First off, I'm actually going to be doing an experiment at Nanowrimo this month that I wanted to tell you guys about. And then secondly, I'm going to tell you about the things that I'm going to do for Preptober to make sure that I'm ready for Nanowrimo, and hopefully some of those things would be useful tips for you guys. So as much as I will be relating them to my project and my circumstance, I'm hoping some of those things will be relatable to all of you watching out there. So the first thing I mentioned was that I was going to be doing an experiment. Well, I've been wanting to do this for a little while, so I figured Nanowrimo was the perfect opportunity to do that because I knew I was going to be writing consistently. I get a little stressed out sometimes in terms of word count. So if I sit there and figure out that, oh, I need 6,000 words, that seems kind of almost a little overwhelming to me sometimes, depending on what that number is at the end. If it's 500 words, then I feel I can knock it off. If it's 6,000 or 10,000 words, sometimes that feels like it's going to be a big hurdle to get over. So I wanted to try and like flip my mindset in terms of word counts, but still be writing consistently every day. So what I've done is taken the 50,000 words for Nanowrimo and broken it down into word sprints. So 20-minute word sprints, because those tend to be my kind of sweet spot as to what I like to write for word sprints. And I've broken it down to how many sprints it should take me to get to 50,000 words. To figure out your average for word sprints, I've talked about this a couple of times already. I've talked about it here. And I've also talked about it over here too. So if you're trying to figure out what your average is, you could go back into those videos. But essentially, I know what my average is for a 20-minute sprint. I usually am very conservative in that, so I kind of underestimate a little bit. But I do know what my average is for a 20-minute sprint, and I figured out how many 20-minute sprints it would take me to get to 50,000 words. This I've broken down into the days and the weeks of November. So then that way I know how many word sprints essentially it should take me to do this over the course of the month. I figure instead of focusing on needing that 1,667 words per day, I can focus on, okay, so that's 3 word sprints, or that's 4 word sprints, or whatever your average is going to be. So that way I can break it down in terms of time as opposed to sitting down and trying to get those words out. I find it kind of frustrating sometimes when I sit down and I'm trying to do 1,667 words. Some days I'm going to be able to whip that off really fast. And some days that's going to take me almost 3 hours depending on how my flow is going. So instead of focusing on that specific word count, I figured I can just base everything on my averages and do my word sprints. So if I do 3 word sprints in a day, let's say that's what I need, I do my 3 word sprints, then yeah, maybe I'm going to go slightly more than I need for the day. Maybe I'm going to be slightly under. My intention is not to check my actual word counts until the end of the week. That way, if I do find out that I am way overestimating things, that maybe I can dial things back a little bit. Or if I'm completely under word count, I can ramp things up because clearly the experiment isn't working. Ideally, my average accounts for those word sprints where I write way more and those word sprints where I write way less. That way, if I have a particularly bad day, I'm not focusing on trying to get those words out. I've done my sprints and I can move on because I know on another day, I'm going to do better than I should be for my word sprints, and it should all balance itself out. I probably will be a little bit more particular in those last couple of days if I haven't hit the 50,000 words yet, just to make sure that I am trying to hit that goal. But I think that this might be really good mentally for me because I'm not focusing on a specific word count. I'm focusing on sitting down, showing up, and just writing for a specific amount of time. Hopefully it's going to get me where I need to go, and this experiment's going to work out really well. However, there is the possibility that I could go completely off the rails. So I will definitely give everybody an update on how that experiment's going through Nanowrimo, and if that's something that you would like to try, let me know in the comments below and maybe we can do it together. But I think it's going to be a really good thing for me, especially since November is going to be pretty stressful, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the video. So I'm hoping that this way it's just going to get me to sit down, to write, and I'm not going to focus on the words so much that I'm stressing myself out. I just focus on writing, enjoying writing, which is what everybody should be doing in Nanowrimo. They should be enjoying the process and moving forward on my project. Speaking of that, I guess it's time to announce my project. My project is actually going to be the next in my Faraway High series. So I'm going to be doing a fairy tale retelling. I'm going to be doing a retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses, which is pretty exciting because it was a fairy tale that I really, really liked as a kid, and I don't see it quite as often retold. There are many retellings of it out there, but it's not quite as popular as, say, Cinderella or Snow White or one of those other ones. So I'm really hoping that it's going to be awesome. And fortunately, the Faraway High series is a little bit on the shorter side. I do write shorter. They're not quite novellas. They're longer than that. They usually run around the 40,000 to 50,000 word mark. So this is going to be the perfect project for Nanowrimo, as I'm going to be able to pretty much finish the project in that amount of time if I complete the 50,000 word goal, and then maybe get a little bit on something else in there as well, just to get up to that 50,000 words. So how am I going to do this? There's basically 3 steps that I'm going to be looking into for my Preptober to make sure that I am ready to go on November 1st. And that is going to be research, outlining, and offense. So I'll go through those individually, and hopefully there'll be something that can pertain to your project as well. So research, obviously I'm doing a fairy tale retelling, so I'm going to need to go back and reacquaint myself with that fairy tale. I definitely have a lot of fairy tale books, and I have one that I have kept ever since I was a little girl, and it has all of my favorite fairy tales in here, all the original, really like dark and twisted versions too, which is awesome, instead of the clean Disney happy versions of them. I will typically, when I'm doing a fairy tale retelling, as I will look at the original fairy tales, at least in my fairy tale book that I have, they're in there. I will also Google a couple of different versions of fairy tales out there. I will take a look at anybody who's ever done a retelling of that particular fairy tale, just so I can see what kind of things people have already done and whether or not I'm being unique in what I'm doing, or if this is the same sort of thing that everybody else has done with the same fairy tale. And I will also usually do a search on theme as well, because I do want to see what kind of themes are expressed in the fairy tale if I'm not picking up on them on my own. And then sometimes you can play a little bit more with the theme than the plot itself and still keep within that fairy tale realm, because my fairy tales are in a contemporary setting, and I do tend to take them in very different directions. Like my Little Mermaid retelling was done with angels. However, it still has that fish out of water concept. It still has that time limit of her possibly losing her wings versus, you know, Ariel losing her tail, and all those kinds of things do actually tie well in together. Plus, I did some of the stuff with the original fairy tale in terms of some of like the heaven and souls kind of concept that is in the original Hans Christian Andersen tale, and not necessarily in the more up-to-date versions. So I like to have a very well-rounded idea of the fairy tale and how people are perceiving it. So for me, research is really, really important. And the earlier that I do this, the easier it's going to be for me to plot, because I already kind of have those things churning in my head of how that fairy tale works and trying to apply it to my world. For anyone else, research can be an important tool that you use in Preptober for your Nanowrimo project, because it allows you to not have to stop, look things up, or skip areas where you can delve into things a little bit more. Also, if you are researching particular topics up front, it may start to give you more ideas, and it may be easier to move forward with your writing if you've already fleshed that stuff out. Whereas if you're not as in tune with the topics that you need to research, you might find yourself struggling to write the scene because you're not exactly sure how those things work. Sometimes they can be very simple things. Maybe you need to know more about a particular type of car. Maybe you need to know about how explosives go off, or specific herbs that were very popular in medieval witch lore. Anything that you can definitely help build your story and that you know already up front you're probably going to need. It doesn't hurt to go do some of that research up front now, even if you haven't completely solidified everything, because it'll help you move forward a little bit quicker for NaNoWriMo. Obviously for me, being in tune with the fairy tale is very, very important because that's the entire thing that the story is strung on. So I definitely need to do my research. But if there's even some small points that you already know you're going to have to look up, maybe spend some time in October taking a look at those things now so that you don't have to worry about it later. My second step here will be outlining. However, I outline very differently for NaNoWriMo than I do for any other project, and that is that I don't do very much outlining. So for me, I'm going to pick up my major beats. I'm going to know how it ends. I'm going to know how it starts, and then I will probably make a list underneath of any key scenes that kind of come into my head as I'm going through the month and I'm getting closer to the project. I usually do this in Google Sheets so I can access it anywhere. Plus I like the fact of being able to put a list in different cells as opposed to in Word if some people like to do that, or Google Docs. So I'll tend to keep a Google Sheet that I can access from anywhere, where I'm going to have my beats in place and kind of like my estimated page count of where those things should hit, some descriptions of those and why they fall where they should be, like why is this the inciting incident, why is this an important turning point, why is this, etc. I'm going to be using basically a 4-act structure as opposed to a 3-act structure, where I'm going to be focusing on the inciting incident, the entering of the new world, if you've seen that anywhere, your midpoint, and the dark night of the soul. So that's kind of how I'm going to pick out those major beats. I'm also going to know exactly how it's going to start, which will probably tie in with the inciting incident, and I'm going to know what that climax is as well. So I'll break those out onto my sheet, and then underneath I'll have that list of those scenes that I want to include. Normally, I do outline a lot more in depth. The reason I'm not going to be doing this for NaNoWriMo is that I find it restricts me a little bit and slows me down. When I am writing normally, I do like to have that little bit of restriction. The more that I have things outlined, the cleaner I find that my manuscript is when I'm completed. However, it does slow me down a little bit because I'm trying to work within the outline that I've created, and then sometimes I get a little bit off track when I'm writing, and then I'll go back, or it'll stop, or it'll cause a problem because I know I'm going off book. There's a lot of books that I've written that have completely gone off their outline, and that's totally okay, but it does cause me a little bit of mental stress when I know that I'm not writing the story that I originally intended. By keeping things very loose for NaNoWriMo, I find I have a little bit more creativity in terms of writing everything out and just running with it. This allows me to have a higher word count, which is lovely. However, it does require me to do a lot more editing on the tail end. However, when you're trying to do something where it's specifically related to word count, it probably makes more sense to allow yourself to fly a little bit freer, especially because it is on a time-limited basis. So I will be keeping things very, very loose for my outline. Some of the other videos or author tubers you may see out there are going to outline very, very detailed because that makes things easier for them. I know myself that it doesn't make it easier for me. It actually completely locks me into a script that I just get really frustrated with when I deviate from. So I'm not going to do that to myself. I'm going to make sure that those major points for my story are absolutely as solid as I can make them, and then everything kind of flows from there nicely. So that is my outlining process. Whatever your outlining process is, I would love to hear about it. So if you want to include that in the comments below, and maybe one of these days I will do a video on how I do my more intense outlining when I'm working on a project that's outside of NaNoWriMo, and that is a little bit more stricter outline. So if you guys are interested in seeing a video like that and how I outline my books, you can include that in the comments below as well, and I will look at doing that probably within the new year. All right, and the third thing, which is probably going to be the most important thing for me in Preptober, is offense. So what I need to do is I need to make sure that I am creating a space in November where I can write. I said earlier in the video that I was probably going to be really, really stressed. The reason for that is it is a super busy time for me at work. So if I can get my stuff done during the day, then that's awesome. But there is a probability that I'm probably going to have to be working some overtime or doing some work on weekends, which is going to take away from my writing time. This is unfortunate, but it's also inevitable, and I really can't plan much ahead on that. It's going to be what it's going to be. Also, I have a book release in November, so there's definitely going to be time taken away from writing to do some marketing and make sure that everything is ready to go for that book release. So that's definitely going to cause me a little bit of stress. So this is why I figured it was a perfect time to try that experiment by just writing for a specific amount of time as opposed to stressing out about word count. I'm really hoping that everything's going to be locked and loaded and ready to go for the book release, and that hopefully my work isn't going to be too awful so that it's not going to take me too far away from my project, but I really have no idea how bad it's going to be until I'm kind of in the thick of it. So I'm trying to plan ahead as much as possible to make sure that I still have my writing time in NaNoWriMo. So how am I going to do that? First off, I'm going to try to make sure that everything for that book release is done as early as I can. I'm going to try to make sure that I get through my edits, make sure all that stuff's done, make sure it's not dragging into November close to the release, and make sure I can get everything in place as much as humanly possible. I'm also going to make sure I try to set up any advertising that I want to be doing for this, any announcements. I'm going to probably pre-schedule them on for release date so that everything is just ready to go. I don't even have to think about it. And if I forget I have a release, no big deal. I can work on my NaNoWriMo project and it can just go off without a hitch. Speaking of planning my ads and my announcements, one of the other things that I want to do is I want to try and plan ahead on some of my social media. I tend to have something up on all of my platforms at least once a day during the week. So some of that stuff that I know I've already thought through that I want to put up there, I'm going to schedule those things out. I'm still going to need to go in to interact with those posts, but it's not something that I'm going to need to think about every day if I can schedule out my social media for a few weeks or a month, or at least the last couple of weeks of November where I know it's going to get tighter for my word count and it's closer to my release. So it's going to be a little bit more stressful for me in all realms of my life. So I can make sure I'm in front of it and it's not going to be a source of stress for me every single day trying to come up with something to say. Even if I don't schedule it out, I will probably write it down in like a calendar like this by day as to what I'm going to be posting. So that way I know what I have, make sure I have my graphics for that and all that sort of stuff is ready to go. I'm also going to make sure that I have my graphics ready for everything I want to do. Any teasers that I want to have in November, anything I need to set up for this book launch, I'm going to try to do those graphics in October. So even if I don't post them until the very last minute, at least I have that stuff set up and I'm not fussing with BookBrush or Canva trying to get that stuff together in time. The other things I'm going to do to prep and be on the offensive for NaNoWriMo is to make sure that all of my tools are ready, everything is charged. If I need to get new Post-it notes, any of that stuff, I have already done it. I've made sure my office is clean so that it's not stressing me out with all the clutter. And I'm also going to tell my family that this is what's coming up so that they're fully aware that this is something that I'm focused on. I'm planning to do a meal plan for all of November so that I have everything planned out, which will make things a little bit easier for grocery shopping and not having to think about what's for dinner. It'll already be planned out. Plus, anytime I get a chance to do so in October, I'm going to be doing maybe some freezer meals and some make ahead stuff. So in that way, I'm completely prepared to get meals out quickly for my family because they have other activities and other things going on in their life than my books, unfortunately. So they can focus on that. I can focus on what I need to do and nobody's really losing any sort of time. So those are the things that I'm going to do to try and get ahead. I'm going to get ahead on my release. I'm going to get ahead on just the regular things in my life. And if there's anything that I can do at work to alleviate some of that stuff in November, I might actually put in some overtime in October just to try to make that November a little bit smoother so I can focus on my words instead of focusing on my day job. So those are the things that I'm going to be doing for Preptober. I don't know if you're participating in NaNoWriMo, but if you are, leave it in the comments below. Maybe let me know what your project is because I'd love to hear what you guys are working on. I will be back next week where I'm actually going to be talking about a project that I had for NaNoWriMo a few years ago. So hopefully you will stay tuned for that. If you are not a subscriber and you do want to become one, it's very simple. You just need to hit that subscription bar and the notification bell below this video, and they will let you know every time I put up a new video. If you liked this video, make sure you're hitting that thumbs up and that you're hitting the thumbs up on every video that you like, because this is telling YouTube that this is something worth watching and they're going to let other people know that this is a good video and they should be checking out my channel. So thank you very much for watching. I hope your Preptober goes fantastic. I'm sure I will give some updates periodically throughout the month as to how things are going, but I will definitely be online for Nanowrimo, as I'm very much looking forward to it. I haven't been able to participate the last couple of years because I've basically been in edits for various different projects. So I'm really excited to be starting Nanowrimo with a brand new project, which makes things a whole lot simpler. If you're starting with a new book, it's so much easier to get words out than it is when you're just trying to do that last little slog through a book. The words just usually come a little bit more freer than when you've already done a lot of the work on a project. So anyway, very excited, very pumped, waiting for Nanowrimo to start. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next week.